The sound of champagne glasses clinking against each other filled the air, mixed with the hum of chatter and bursts of laughter that seemed to ripple through the grand reception hall. Golden chandeliers spilled warm light over rows of tables dressed in ivory linens, each centerpiece a carefully arranged display of roses and lilies. The place smelled faintly of wine, bread and perfume, and every detail screamed money and presentation. It was my cousin's wedding, and from the moment I walked in, I knew I wasn't here as family. I was here as a curiosity, someone to be whispered about when they thought I couldn't hear. I sat at the far end of the long table, my back straight, my hands folded in my lap. My dress was simple but tailored, navy blue and neat. I didn't want to overshadow the bride, and frankly, I didn't have much to prove to anyone here. At least, that's what I told myself. In reality, I knew exactly how I stood out. I wasn't just the quiet one. I was the soldier no one really believed was doing anything important. I'd seen that doubt in their eyes before, and I could feel it now, even before my brother opened his mouth. Daniel has always had a talent for making himself the center of attention, especially if it meant turning someone else into the punchline. I heard his voice from a few seats away, loud enough to cut through the music and the conversation around us. "So, Emily," he called out, leaning back in his chair so he could lock eyes with me, "still pushing papers in that air-conditioned office of yours?" A few heads turned toward me, curiosity already in their faces. I took a slow breath, ready to answer, but he lifted his hand as if to stop me, his grin wide and smug. "Oh, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. Someone's got to do the, administrative stuff? Filing? Sending emails to generals about coffee schedules?" His laugh was sharp and rehearsed, the kind of laugh you give to invite others to join in. A few cousins chuckled weakly, glancing between the two of us. I kept my expression still, but inside I could feel my patience wearing thinner with each word. This wasn't the first time I'd heard someone reduce my career to paperwork, and Daniel was far from the worst offender. Still, the sting was there. He didn't know the nights I'd spent overseas on bases, locked down under threat. He didn't know about the classified missions I'd run communications for, or the way every decision I made sometimes carried the weight of lives I'd never meet. He didn't know about the friends who didn't make it home. And even if I told him, I doubt he'd believe me. The bride's father tried to steer the conversation elsewhere, asking Daniel about his new car, but of course Daniel wasn't finished. "I'm just saying," he continued, swirling his wine like it was part of the performance. "For all the talk about serving your country, you'd think you'd be out there doing something, I don't know, dangerous. But I guess desk duty's safer, right?" My fingers curled slightly against the fabric of my dress. Not everything dangerous makes the news, I thought, but I said it out loud, keeping my voice calm. He smirked in that way I knew too well. "Sure, if you say so." That smirk was a familiar weapon. I'd seen it the day I told him I was enlisting, when he said I was just running from real life. I'd seen it every holiday since, in every conversation where he found a way to question what I'd accomplished without ever actually asking me. Around the table, a few relatives shifted uncomfortably, some pretending not to listen, others clearly hoping I'd take the bait and give them a story to talk about later. I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I lifted my water glass and took a slow sip, letting him think he'd won. But deep down, I knew something he didn't, something that was going to make him swallow every word before the night was over. The music picked up and couples began to fill the dance floor, the air now a little warmer, the room buzzing with celebration. My mind drifted away from the noise around me. I thought of my unit, my brothers and sisters in arms, the people who had put their lives in my hands more than once. I thought of the coded radio messages in the dead of night, the strategy meetings that blurred into morning, the way one wrong move could mean disaster. My last mission had been one of the hardest. No glory, no headlines, just the knowledge that silence was the only thing keeping others alive. Daniel pictured me sitting at a desk shuffling papers. He didn't picture me coordinating evacuation routes for civilians in a hostile zone. He didn't picture me negotiating with armed locals to protect aid workers. He didn't picture me working through the night tracking convoys and relaying intel under pressure, so thick it felt like a physical weight. And I didn't need him to. Not yet. Hey, he called again as I stood to stretch my legs. Don't wander too far. If there's an office in the building, I'm sure they could use your skills. His grin widened as a couple of people chuckled. I met his eyes and gave him the faintest smile. I'll keep that in mind. My voice was even, but inside I was already turning over the moment in my head, waiting. The right time would come, and when it did, I wouldn't need to raise my voice. If you've ever been underestimated by someone close to you, or had to prove yourself in a way they never saw coming, you know exactly what that moment feels like. And if you want to hear how this one unfolds, make sure you hit that subscribe button and like this video, because I promise, what happens next will make you want to stand up and cheer. I moved toward the edge of the dance floor, weaving past couples lost in their own celebrations. I could feel Daniel watching me, waiting for me to disappear quietly so he could file the evening away as another win in his unspoken scoreboard. I didn't give him that satisfaction. I lingered near the entrance, where each time the door opened, the cool night air spilled in. My aunt, one of the few in the family who never treated my career like a joke, caught my eye and smiled. You're handling him well, she said softly, tilting her head toward Daniel. I've had worse. I replied with a shrug, and it was true. I'd faced commanding officers who doubted me, locals who laughed in my face, situations that would have flattened Daniel in seconds. He was just noise. But that didn't mean the words didn't sting. I'd come here to celebrate family, but it was always family that knew how to cut the deepest. I considered stepping outside to clear my head, but before I could, my cousin, the bride, appeared in a whirl of satin and perfume. She hugged me tightly, her voice low in my ear. I'm so glad you came. Ignore Daniel. He doesn't know when to stop. I smiled for her sake. It's fine. This is your night. I'm not letting him ruin it. Even as I said it, a flicker of something sharper than anger lit in my chest. Call it certainty, call it inevitability, but I knew before this night ended, Daniel was going to see exactly what I was capable of. And when it happened, I wouldn't have to explain a thing. He'd see it with his own eyes, and there would be no going back from that. The reception was still in full swing, the kind of chaotic yet oddly rhythmic energy that only weddings seem able to produce. A mix of laughter that drifted from one end of the hall to the other, cutlery clinking against china, and the occasional cheer from the dance floor where people, emboldened by champagne and the warmth of celebration, moved with varying degrees of grace to the music. I lingered near the entrance, just close enough to feel the faint breath of night air whenever the large doors opened to admit a late guest or allow someone to step outside for a phone call or a smoke. I still had a glass of water in my hand, though I hadn't taken a sip in quite some time. The cool condensation had made my fingers slightly damp, and without really thinking about it, I would shift my grip from one hand to the other, letting the cold bite a little into my skin. It wasn't thirst that held me there. It was something else entirely, something I could feel building quietly inside me like the slow tightening of a drawn bowstring, and I knew that when it finally released, the moment would be sharp, clean, and impossible to take back. Across the hall, Daniel was once again at the center of a small knot of relatives, his posture loose and confident, his gestures large and theatrical, the way a man performs when he's aware of being watched and has no doubt that whatever he says will be received as witty, clever, or worth remembering. He was halfway through another story. Something about a recent work trip, though the specifics didn't seem to matter, because I could already tell by the over-polished delivery and the exaggerated hand movements that it had been shaped for entertainment rather than accuracy. He was the kind of storyteller who measured success not by truth, but by the number of laughs at the end, and in that way, he was predictable. Then, perhaps sensing I hadn't been paying him the attention he thought he deserved, his eyes found mine again, and in an instant I could see that familiar spark of mischief, that impulse to pull me into the performance, not to include me, but to use me. You know, I was just telling them, he said loudly so that the words carried clearly over the music and the nearby conversations, that Emily's job is basically like a secretary for the army. Not exactly, of course, but you get the idea. He tilted his head slightly toward the small group around him, waiting for the ripple of chuckles that followed, watching me over the rims of their amusement as if gauging how far he could push. I held his gaze for a moment, my head tilted just a fraction, and said nothing, letting the silence stretch between us until it was just slightly uncomfortable, until the corner of his smile faltered, and he covered it with a sip from his wine glass. I'd learned a long time ago that sometimes the most effective response is no response at all, at least not the kind the other person expects. What I felt in that moment wasn't the hot, quick anger I used to feel when someone underestimated me. It was something slower, heavier, and far more deliberate. Anticipation has a weight to it, and I was letting it settle fully in my chest. The band shifted into a softer, slower song, coaxing couples back onto the dance floor, and for a few moments I let my eyes wander there instead. There was something almost hypnotic about the movement of people swaying together, some with an ease that spoke of decades spent in each other's company, others awkward but determined, finding the rhythm as they went. I might have allowed myself to sink into the simplicity of it if not for the thoughts that began to push forward in my mind, uninvited but insistent. The memory of the desert came first, not the picturesque version you see in travel brochures, but the endless sprawl of heat and dust, the kind that clings to you no matter how many times you wash it off, the kind that settles into your hair, your clothes, even the small lines of your skin. I remembered the comms tent where I had spent long, unbroken stretches of time with the low hum of electronics in my ears, the voices of operators and officers and field units filling my headset in fragments, some calm, others sharp with urgency. Translating those fragments into clear, immediate orders was more than a task. It was a chain, each link critical, and if one broke, the weight it carried could shatter lives. I remembered nights when the air outside the tent was thick with the smell of burning, when every sound seemed sharper, when every decision had to be both fast and flawless. Those are the moments that shape you, the moments that stay with you in ways you never fully explain to anyone outside of it. Daniel would never picture that when he thought of me. He'd never picture the maps spread across tables, the red-marked routes that could mean safety for civilians if only the timing was exact, or the tense conversations with armed locals who didn't trust us but could be persuaded, with the right words, to stand aside. He'd never see the faces of the people we got out, or the ones we couldn't, because I carry those alone. A group of my younger cousins hurried past me toward the dessert table, their arms linked, their laughter bright and unburdened. I caught a few quick glances in my direction, not unkind, but curious in that way younger people often are when they sense there's more to someone than they've been told. To them, I might as well have been a character from a half-heard story, someone whose life existed in fragments and rumors. I wondered if they imagined me at a neat little desk somewhere, tapping at a keyboard and answering phones. I was still thinking about that when the main doors swung open with a sudden force that made the hinges groan, and a rush of cool air swept through the space. The music didn't stop, but it faltered for a moment as heads turned toward the source of the sound. From outside came the unmistakable, low, steady rumble of multiple engines, the kind of deep mechanical growl that carries with it a sense of precision and purpose. I knew that sound instantly, even before I looked. Through the open doorway, I caught the dark, angular silhouettes of black SUVs, their headlights spilling long beams across the parking lot, the glint of government plates visible under the lights from the hall. The shift in the room was subtle but immediate, like the invisible ripple you feel when a crowd senses that something entirely out of the ordinary has just entered their world. A man in a dark suit stepped inside, his expression focused and unflinching as he scanned the room. He moved with the efficiency of someone who already knew exactly who he was looking for, and when his eyes landed on me, there was no hesitation in his stride. He stopped a pace in front of me, his voice clear but measured, carrying easily enough to draw the attention of those nearby. "Major Emily Carter?" "That's me," I answered, my voice steady. "You're needed immediately. Transport is waiting outside." Even without looking, I could feel the way the air around us seemed to still. Conversations tapered off, the clink of glasses paused. I didn't move right away. letting the weight of the moment settle before I stepped forward. From somewhere to my left came the faint clatter of a fork hitting a plate, and when I finally glanced toward Daniel, I saw him standing frozen, his glass halfway to his mouth, his usual expression of amusement replaced by something uncertain. I walked toward the suited man, each step deliberate, the click of my heels on the polished floor cutting through the quiet that had fallen over the nearest tables. He turned smoothly and matched my pace, lowering his voice, so only I could hear. Operational details will be given on the move. Convoy is secure. Orders from command came through 10 minutes ago. I gave a single nod. Understood. We reached the open doors, and now the SUVs were fully in view, 3 of them in a tight formation, engines idling in perfect unison. A uniformed aide stepped quickly from the lead vehicle, his posture straight and sharp, and came toward me with the kind of discipline that comes from years of drilling. "Major Carter," he said, his voice carrying a note of urgency. "We're set to depart."
Mission briefing en route.
The murmurs from inside the hall were growing, a quiet wave of speculation and whispered questions that I could almost feel pressing against my back. I turned my head slightly, enough to see Daniel still at the doorway, his features caught somewhere between confusion and a dawning recognition he couldn't quite hide. I didn't speak to him. I didn't need to. I stepped forward, the aide opening the rear door of the SUV for me, the interior dim and cool, the glow of the dashboard casting a muted light across the space. Sliding into the seat, I could still sense the weight of the eyes on me, though the tinted windows would soon erase them from view. The door shut with a decisive, insulated sound that seemed to seal the moment in place. As the convoy began to roll forward, headlights cutting through the night, I allowed myself one last look over my shoulder through the tinted glass. Daniel was still standing there, framed by the warm lights of the hall, the noise of the reception behind him, and though I couldn't see every detail of his expression now, I knew without question that the smugness was gone. The man in the suit handed me a folder, the edges of it firm under my fingertips. "High-priority extraction," he said. "Command specifically requested you." I didn't open it right away. Instead, I let the steady vibration of the vehicle's movement ground me, my thoughts already shifting from the dim glow of the wedding hall to the stark clarity of mission focus. Out there, beyond the city, beyond the reach of Daniel's assumptions or anyone else's, there was no question of my worth. Out there, the work I did mattered without the need for an audience, and every decision I made carried weight in ways that would never be measured by applause or approval. And as the convoy turned onto the main road, the night swallowing the last trace of the wedding behind us, I knew that whatever waited ahead would not just pull me from the hall, it would leave behind an image Daniel could never erase. The ride in the convoy was smooth, almost unnervingly so, the low hum of the engine and the muffled rush of air against the exterior blending into a constant, steady background that allowed my mind to begin its shift from the awkward warmth of the reception to the sharper, colder clarity that always came before an operation. The man in the suit sat opposite me, his eyes on the folder he'd handed over earlier, though he didn't speak until we were several turns and perhaps a few miles away from the wedding hall. When he finally did, his tone was direct, professional, and entirely stripped of anything unnecessary, the way people in our line of work learn to communicate when time matters. He explained that there had been an unexpected development involving a liaison I'd worked with before. A high-value civilian whose safe extraction had become urgent after an intelligence leak placed them in immediate danger. My name had been at the top of the list of requested personnel because, as he put it, I already had the trust of the individual in question, and the mission window was closing quickly. I nodded as he spoke, my mind already filling in the gaps he didn't have time to detail, recalling the circumstances under which I'd last worked with this person, the tense negotiations that had built the fragile bridge of trust we'd stood on then, and the reasons they might be reluctant to follow anyone else's lead now. Outside the tinted window, the city was slipping away, the glow of storefronts and traffic lights giving way to darker stretches of road, where the only illumination came from our own headlights and the occasional reflective marker on the asphalt. The convoy's radio crackled with short bursts of coded communication between the drivers, and though I didn't have an earpiece linked to their channel, I could read the efficiency in their exchanges by the rhythm of the responses and the way the lead vehicle adjusted speed with almost imperceptible precision. There is a comfort in that kind of coordination, the kind born not from luck but from trust earned over countless hours of doing the work exactly right. As we approached the staging area where a small forward team was waiting, the vehicle slowed, their headlights sweeping across a line of figures in tactical gear who moved toward us with the calm, practiced ease of people who understood their roles intimately. The aide from earlier opened my door before the convoy had even fully stopped, offering a hand to steady me as I stepped out, though I didn't need it. The air outside was cooler, fresher than the warm, perfume-heavy atmosphere of the wedding, and it carried with it the faint scent of damp earth, as though rain had passed through the area earlier. One of the team leaders approached quickly, saluted, and then launched into a briefing that compressed hours of preparation into a matter of minutes. The target location was a narrow residential street on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place where close quarters would make maneuvering difficult and every move would have to be calculated with precision. The extraction point was the rear entrance of a 3-story building, and while the forward team had already secured part of the perimeter, there was still a risk that whoever had leaked the information might attempt to block our departure. Listening to the details, I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, not fear, but the heightened awareness that comes when every variable matters. This was the part of my work Daniel would never see, the part no one at that wedding could begin to imagine, and it was also the part one lived for because here, in these moments, the stakes were real, the trust was absolute, and the outcome depended on skill, not perception. We moved quickly toward the transport that would take us to the target site, the hum of the vehicle's engine blending with the low murmur of final checks being called out between team members. Inside, the space was utilitarian, stripped of anything non-essential, and the quiet was purposeful rather than awkward. I reviewed the mental map of the building again, cross-referencing it with the potential approaches we might have to take if something shifted unexpectedly. The window for this extraction was narrow, and while the plan was solid, I'd been in the game long enough to know that even the best plan bends under pressure. When we arrived, the operation unfolded with the kind of efficiency that is almost invisible when it works perfectly. The forward team's coordination was seamless, each movement flowing into the next as we navigated the dimly lit alley behind the building. The contact was already waiting just inside the secured entry point, their relief palpable but tempered by the urgency in their eyes. Trust, once earned, has a weight to it, and in that moment, I felt the full measure of it as they stepped toward me without hesitation, ready to follow my lead. We moved out quickly, the quiet punctuated only by the occasional burst of communication from the perimeter teams. Every step was measured, every glance purposeful, until finally we were back at the vehicle, the contact ushered inside, and the convoy pulling away from the narrow street with a smoothness that made it seem as if we'd never been there at all. The danger wasn't gone yet, but the hardest part was over, and I could feel the subtle shift in the air that comes with the knowledge that you've done exactly what you came to do. The return trip was quiet, and though I kept my focus outward, part of me was already thinking about the fact that the wedding would still be going on when I got back, that the reception hall would still be filled with the same music and laughter, and that Daniel would still be there. Only now, he would see me differently. He might never admit it out loud, but the image of me being called away, of the black SUVs and the man in the suit, would sit in his mind long after tonight. A reminder that his version of my life had never been the truth. When we finally arrived back at the staging point where the convoy had first picked me up, the man in the suit stepped out with me, his expression unreadable, but his tone respectful. Command will debrief you tomorrow. For now, you're clear to return. I nodded once, not because I needed the permission, but because I understood the unspoken acknowledgement in his voice. As we approached the hall again, the contrast was almost jarring. The warm golden light spilling from the windows, the muffled sound of music and voices, the faint vibration of bass through the ground. The aide opened the door for me, and I stepped back into the reception, my heels clicking softly on the polished floor as conversations faltered and eyes turned toward me. Daniel was standing near the same spot he'd been in earlier. Though his posture had shifted, the easy lean replaced by something straighter, his expression caught somewhere between curiosity and discomfort. For a moment, we simply looked at each other across the space, and in that silence, I could feel the weight of the unspoken passing between us. He didn't ask what had happened, and I didn't offer to explain. The truth was, he didn't need to know the details to understand that his assumptions had never fit the reality. I made my way back to my seat, accepting a few quiet nods from relatives who had clearly pieced together their own version of events in my absence. The bride caught my eye from across the room, a small, knowing smile playing at her lips, and I returned it, grateful that at least she had wanted me here for who I was, not for who anyone imagined me to be. As the night wound down and the last dances began, I found myself thinking less about Daniel's words and more about the space between what people believe and what is real, how that gap is often filled with assumptions that crumble the moment they're confronted with undeniable truth. Daniel might never apologize, might never even admit to himself that he had been wrong, but I didn't need his acknowledgement. What I had was far more valuable. The knowledge that, for the first time, he had seen enough to realize there was far more to my life than he'd ever guessed. And as I sat there, the music soft in the background and the hum of conversation rising and falling around me, I knew that if there was one thing I wanted the people listening to my story to take away, it was this: sometimes you don't have to fight to prove yourself. Sometimes the truth has a way of walking through the door on its own, and when it does, it speaks louder than anything you could ever say. If you've ever had a moment where someone finally saw you for who you really are, if you've ever felt that quiet, undeniable satisfaction of being proven right without saying a word, then you know exactly what I felt that night. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, make sure you subscribe and stay with me, because there's so much more I could tell you.